Hello, and welcome to today's webinar, Removing the Complexity of Sophisticated Cybersecurity to Beat Sophisticated Threats, brought to you by Defendify and Spiceworks Davis. I am Karen Bannon, and I'll be your moderator for today. So organizations with basic cybersecurity tools are being threatened by the same sophisticated cyber attacks that larger enterprises are. If your cybersecurity program has not evolved to protect against modern threats, many attacks may be going undetected, and most will result, unfortunately, in a hefty expense to fix the breach. But protecting data across your entire organization does not mean you need to build a complicated security technology stack or hire an internal team of security experts to manage it 24/7. And this is something our speakers will discuss today as they go over the current cyber threat landscape, how organizations without security teams can gain the same comprehensive protection as larger enterprise security solutions, but without the expense or complexity. We'll also cover how listeners can reduce the complexity of building a comprehensive cybersecurity program, streamlining cybersecurity across people, processes, and technology, how to gain visibility of overall cybersecurity risk with clear steps for remediation, and finally, what you need to do to simplify breach detection and response. And so with that, I'd like to introduce our experts, Rob Simopoulos and Rob Knake. Rob Simopoulos is the co-founder of Defendify. He's a more than 20-year veteran of security industries, successfully building and growing multiple businesses and taking on various industry advisory and board roles. He's a frequent national speaker and a thought leader on security. Rob Knake is the Whitney Shepardson Senior Fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations. He served from 2011 to 2015 as a Director for Cybersecurity Policy at the National Security Council and is the former White House Director of Cybersecurity. In his role, he was responsible for the development of presidential policy on cybersecurity and built and managed federal processes for cyber incident response and vulnerability management. And let's get started. So, Rob S., let's turn it over to you.
Thanks, Karen. Appreciate it. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. We're excited about having the conversation today. Rob, thank you for joining. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Rob. How are you?
I'm doing great. Well, let's start off with the first thing. So you were the former director of cybersecurity for the White House. Maybe tell us a little bit, about your career path to get there. I think people would be really interested to learn, how do you become a director of cybersecurity for the White House?
Sure. So, I started in my career out of college, really focusing on cybersecurity policy in the post 9/11 era, looking at how terrorists might use the internet to carry out attacks, to plan, to train, to equip themselves, to coordinate and organize. And so that was sort of my entree into the field. I spent a couple of years in the think tank sector doing that, pursued cyber policy when I went to graduate school, and then spent about a decade working in the consulting field with state and local governments, with private companies, helping them with their cybersecurity before pivoting back to the think tank world briefly, and then getting pulled into government and spent about a year at the Department of Homeland Security, working on counterterrorism issues before being asked to go to the White House, where I spent 4 years on cyber policy.
Great, thank you. Rob, what do you think about the fact that the owner, the CEO, that non-IT technical leader is not necessarily the one leading in a lot of organizations? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think depending on the size of an organization, it's usually a pretty good sign if you've got somebody who feels it's their full-time job or a large piece of their job to manage cybersecurity, right? And the role of the owner or CEO of a company is really to drive what that company does fundamentally, right? To make the money that keeps the business going. Cybersecurity is important, but you don't want it to be the primary focus of your CEO. You want them focused on the bottom line. And so it's good to see that most organizations have somebody below that level who's responsible for cybersecurity. The question I'm seeing here is, okay, what's the interplay between that person who's at that IT manager level, they're keeping the IT environment running, and that next level up, that CISO or CIO, or if none of those positions exist within the organization, how does that IT manager interact with the CEO? And are they going to be in a position to say, hey boss, we're under investing in cybersecurity. We're not meeting these compliance requirements. We're likely to experience a ransomware breach. It could be a company ending event. Do they have the stature in the organization and the backing in the organization to make that kind of case?
Right. Great point. And request the budget. Well, maybe in the end, when this webinar is done, it's something that they can share with the non-IT business leader and see what their thoughts are. Hey, Rob, where I wanted to start was my first real question to you is, how should, having the fact that you've worked in private and government, how should those organizations collaborate together to really provide stronger and holistic cybersecurity today?
Yeah, it's a great question, Rob. The tough thing about cybersecurity, I talked to a lot of boards about this issue. I talked to a lot of business leaders about it. And usually I get some kind of pushback when I'm giving a talk about the role of the private sector in cybersecurity. And, leaders will say things, leaders from the business community will say things like, hey, I make widgets, right? I provide this kind of service. I'm not a cybersecurity company. Right. I'm not set up to defend myself or this country from Russian and Chinese advanced actors. Right. That's what I pay taxes for. I don't have my own anti-ballistic missile defense system. I don't manage our nuclear deterrent. I turn to the government for that. I pay taxes for that. This is national security. This shouldn't be my problem. This should be the government's problem. And it's a compelling argument, and it's a reasonable argument. But the problem with it is that the internet is fundamentally a domain that the government does not have control over, where there aren't clear boundaries between what's U.S. cyberspace and what's Chinese cyberspace and what is contested cyberspace in between, right? We have open borders in cyberspace. And so from that perspective, it's very difficult for government to find a way to step in and say, okay, we're going to take responsibility for all the hard stuff. You're going to be responsible for what you're responsible for in the physical world, right? Put alarms on your doors, make sure you lock up at night before you go home. But, you don't have to worry about the Spetsnaz coming in and breaking into your network, much less repelling them. But, the reality is that that's what you have to do in cyberspace, because the battlefield are your companies. The battlefield are your networks. And from that perspective, government can't be in all those places, nor do you want them to be in those places. And so we spent about the last decade trying to figure out what the division of labor here is. And the reality for those who have a military background is the Department of Defense has finally realized that in most cyber conflicts, they're going to be the supporting entity, not the supported entity, right? They're going to be providing support to private companies. The Department of Homeland Security is going to be providing support to private companies, but it's going to be those companies who are going to actually be responsible for preventing incidents from happening, from responding when prevention fails. And so it's a very different division of labor than in any other national security domain.
Are you seeing collaboration occurring between those sectors, threat intelligence sharing? I know that the Cyberspace Solarium Commission is trying to do some things along those lines. Anything that you can share on that front?
Yeah, so, you've hit on information sharing, which has been for almost 20 years, something that we've been trying to get right between the public and the private sector. And it's really two-way information sharing. So we've got, I think, a lot of the structures and the mechanisms in place to make that happen. We've got information sharing and analysis centers. We've got information sharing and analysis organizations. These are usually nonprofit organizations that have been set up to share information among industry members, to share information with the government, and for the government to be able to share information out to those sectors. We've got those structures in place, and some of them are very strong in the financial services sector, in the health sector. We've also, I think, worked pretty hard to eliminate concerns over liability around sharing information. In the past, companies would raise antitrust concerns. Can I really be sharing information on cyber threats with my competitors? Wouldn't that be some sort of collusion in the market? Those concerns have been put to bed both by Department of Justice and by a series of laws that Congress has passed. But those actions really haven't created, they've set the stage for it, but they haven't really created the kind of collaboration that the Cyber Solarium Commission and many others envision, right? Which would be a real-time collaboration, would be constant information sharing between the government and the private sector, and the private sector and the government. With the government really able to use its capability to carry out foreign intelligence collection to aid private companies. We don't have the mechanisms in place on a technical level to do that, and we don't have a partnership that would encourage that yet. Many U.S. companies are a little shy of the idea of really getting in bed with the U.S. government, particularly if they're operating heavily overseas, particularly if they think of themselves more as a multinational company rather than a U.S. company. So a lot of work left to make that collaboration happen.
Right. Yeah. I think interestingly enough, we're seeing a lot of advisory coming out from the government to private entities, FBI warning, CISA, the whole bit. I think that's beneficial. And I think that will continue. I'm going to go on to the next thing that I can't let you not share a little bit of thoughts around the most recent breach. The SolarWinds was huge, impacted, government organizations, private organizations. Anything you can share with everybody here around your thoughts and, how this occurred, who was involved and so forth?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing to say at the top is this incident has really shaken the confidence that the cybersecurity industry had that we were getting on top of this problem. What we know now, right, what we believe now, according to the U.S. government, right, this was most likely a Russian government agency or a private group acting on behalf of the Russian government. The intent is believed that it was espionage in that classic sense, right? That it wasn't staging for a planned destructive attack, which Russia has carried out before, that it wasn't seeking industrial secrets to give to private companies, that it really was seeking things that would be valued to the Russian intelligence community, sort of diplomatic intelligence. So that's what we know about the goals. In terms of what we understand about the campaign, this is the part that's got the security industry really, really struggling. It went on for at least 11 months without being detected. That's a really long time. The goal that the security industry has set has been detecting a breach within minutes and responding and containing within an hour. And so when you're measuring the length of a compromise in months extending to almost a year, that's a very bad sign, particularly when the actor was accessing just thousands of companies. So from what we know that almost 18,000 companies downloaded the update to the SolarWinds software that contained the initial payload, that it installed on those companies, and it beaconed back to their command and control server. We know from there that the Russians exploited at least 100 so far highly sophisticated organizations, at least a dozen federal agencies, including the Department of Defense, Department of Homeland Security. We know about a number of cybersecurity companies that were compromised in this, very large, very well-protected companies that do this for a living. And then we know that the ultimate way that we're even here discussing this is that FireEye, one of the most respected vendors in the security community, was victimized by this, and they were the ones who discovered the breach. This is pretty remarkable. I mean, FireEye is headed by a guy named Kevin Mandia, who was the founder of Mandiant, which was one of the leading cybersecurity incident response companies going back over a decade. Mandiant was the company that coined the term advanced persistent threat to describe this kind of adversary. They did some of the earliest work in private companies discovering and documenting and tracking these advanced persistent threat groups. And so that FireEye was owned by this group for an extended period of time, that the group was able not only to get into their network to explore it, but to take out their most valuable, most advanced penetration testing tools, is really, really troublesome. And I think it's even more so when you understand how FireEye discovered it. My hat goes off to them because this is just the kind of level of paranoia you need and that they exhibited. The only way they found out about this adversary was because the adversary made a mistake. The adversary tried to enroll a second device onto an employee's multi-factor authentication account. They tried to say, hey, we want to add this device, and the employee rejected that. And the help desk said, hey, why did this guy try and add a new device to his multi-factor and then reject it? And they called him. And the guy said, yeah, no, I wasn't the one who tried to add this device, so I rejected it. And they were like, okay, we have a problem. Amazing. And they began a hunt that took hundreds of hours and hundreds of people to figure out what had happened. Now, let me end with this, right? The adversary in this case was able to evade every tool that FireEye makes and deploys on their network to detect these kinds of threats. We know from looking at the malware that they had figured out they could defeat every single major antivirus vendor, every major next generation antivirus technology, every major endpoint detection and response tool on the market. One way or another, they knew they could either disable them or detect it, shut down, and find another way around them. So it's a level of sophistication, and it really, I think, has in many ways been a blow to the cybersecurity industry.
Amazing. Something that, that breach is going to be looked at the community for years on end to continue to learn from. In your organization that you're working at today, what do you think is going to be 2022? Is it going to be 100% work from home, 100% in office, or this hybrid model where, the company's flexible and they'll let you, work from home, come in the office, and so forth? This is a conversation that's happening all over the place. And I think one of the key reasons we want to share this is to get a better idea of, what people can expect from IT and security perspective on what they're going to be protecting in 2022. The majority of people here are saying, it's going to be a hybrid model. We're going to be in office and work from home. So Rob, go back a year ago, 2019, everyone scrambles to get everybody at home, keep everyone safe. IT teams, security teams, move in that regards like crazy. What are your thoughts on that front? Do you think that now we're going to switch to possibly this hybrid model, and that's going to impact organizations again and their security teams? What are your thoughts on this sort of, I guess we can call it at times a perimeterless world? Any input?
Yeah, I think the most important thing to keep in mind is we're not really living in a perimeterless world so much as a shifting and ever evolving perimeter. You want to think of your perimeter as any time and any place an access decision needs to be made. And so that maybe when somebody tries to log in through your VPN to access a hard drive that's sitting somewhere in a company office server. But that also may be when anybody tries to log into your Salesforce or your Box or Dropbox accounts or to your Office 365 account. That's where your perimeter has moved to. And in many ways, there are some benefits to security from modernization that can come from this move. But it also means that you've got a much larger perimeter to manage and keeping track of where your valuable resources are, knowing what your employees are using, where your critical data is stored has become much, much harder when you don't have that model of people go into the office, they're behind the corporate firewall, and everything they do from there on their company-owned computer can be monitored and can be controlled.
Yeah, I think that's great way of putting it. Totally makes sense. And just, looking even at small and mid-sized companies, on average using, tens and tens, if not, 100 different SaaS applications for everything they're doing, CRM, development applications, QuickBooks, financial systems. It's just a huge number of different sites and SaaS applications that people are logging into today. All right, let's shift and talk about larger enterprise organizations and begin here. Rob, what are like the CISOs and the CTO, the people who have like security teams? What type of cyber attacks are they dealing with on a regular basis now? And what type of sophistication are they dealing with on a daily basis?
Yeah, I mean, we can talk about the SolarWinds attack or the recent Exchange attack. I mean, what you're talking about in these situations is adversaries that are finding or creating opportunities for themselves to access your networks, your resources, no matter what obstacle you put in front of them, right? So the term advanced persistent threat is a really good description of these capabilities because not only are they advanced, not only are they at the cutting edge, not only are they finding new ways to compromise your network using new zero-day vulnerabilities, stringing together existing vulnerabilities in novel ways, creating opportunities like in SolarWinds to compromise your network. It's not just that they're advanced, but it's that they're also persistent, right? They're not going to give up until they achieve whatever objective they have. If you discover them inside your network, like many large companies now have, thanks to FireEye sharing the details of the breach and the indicators of compromise, they're not just going to be like, you got me, I'm going home, right? They're going to have created multiple new access pathways into your organization. You're going to think you shut them down. They're going to get back in. They're going to fight to stay on until they've achieved whatever it is they've set out to achieve. And so, this is really a level of sophistication that is in some ways scary, even for the largest, best equipped organizations to take on.
Yeah, what a challenge, the cat and mouse game nonstop. Pretty crazy situation. So, just to talk a little bit around, for these larger enterprise organizations, can you share a little bit in regards to some of the controls, protection suites, what are their security operations centers doing today on a regular basis? Maybe even, I think you shared a little bit about the SolarWinds, on the detection side, but, if you compared it to an organization that does not have security teams, what are they doing today?
Yeah, I mean, so, these large organizations, the best protected organizations, are organizing their security operations center, really into three levels. Your level one analysts are junior. They're just coming in. They're just handling the first level triage from all the alarms, all the alerts coming off their tools. They're trying to understand whether you've got false positives or whether there's something that second level up needs to investigate, right? And these are going to be more experienced SOC analysts. They're going to be able to fuse together information from a whole bunch of sources. They're going to have access to threat intelligence, and they're going to be able to try and determine whether the tools that are alerting are giving them indications of any real problems within their organizations, or whether they can close them out as false positives. And then really where I see the tier 3 capability at the most advanced organizations is just this threat hunting capability, right? They're not beginning with an alert or an alarm. They're beginning just with raw data, right? Information on how data is flowing across your network, where it's going, what's it going to, what systems are talking to each other, how often that's happened in the past. Is it happening more now? They're doing a lot of just very basic kind of counting, trying to determine is there something anomalous going on inside these organizations? And so it's this kind of threat hunting that really has the best chance of finding these advanced organizations, these advanced threats. It's hard to do. It can also, be very tedious. It can be very time consuming with not a lot of award at most organizations, even those that have a big target on them. Most days you're not going to find anything. You're not going to get that reward of a job well done because most likely there may not be an adversary within your network that other tools can't find. And if there is, you also may not be able to find them, right? So I can tell you that, while there were about 100 advanced companies with very good capabilities and threat hunters working over the last year, many of them were coming up with nothing when in fact they'd been compromised. And so that's the hard part about cybersecurity today, is there really are no guarantees, no matter how good you are. What your best strategy is to equip yourself to a level where you stand a chance of repelling most problems, and then you're going to be able to rapidly respond when you do get compromised and you do get owned.
Yeah, I think one of the key things that you're sharing there is that, there's that massive human element where analysts and threat hunters are searching and trying to analyze and figure out where these compromises have occurred, and not just relying on installing some type of technology. The technology is part of the detection, but this parsing through it all and sorting through it all is a huge part of it for these enterprise organizations. And on that topic, you shared a little bit about SolarWinds and how they had figured out ways to bypass antivirus systems, and we constantly see attacks even on phishing emails, getting through spam filters and spam blockers. Maybe tell us a little bit, in the cybercrime world, how are these adversaries circumventing traditional cybersecurity protection methods like antivirus, next gen antivirus and spam filters? How are they doing that?
Yeah, the short answer is they're creating opportunities where they can test their capabilities before they go after the targets that they really care about. And so, I'll go back to SolarWinds. Right? We know from some very detailed analysis of the malware used in the SolarWinds attack that they had taken almost every antivirus capability out there, and they said, okay, we want to know what's installed on a computer once we've implanted. Once we're installed, we want to get a list of everything running on the system. And they knew which were the security suites out of those lists. And then they made decisions ahead of time, which was, if this malware is installed, if this detection suite's installed, they knew that the malware wouldn't be detected by it already, that they could just go on about their business. That, I'm not going to name names here, but, certain very large, very well-known companies weren't going to be able to detect them, that they were staying below the threshold where it was even going to generate an alert, let alone automatically block the malware. For others, they knew that it would detect them, but they knew that they could bypass it, that they would be able to simply turn off the detection tool, right? That the tamper resistance on it, they found a weakness. So they could just say, okay, we're going to turn it off and we're going to go about our business. And then there's still other category of some of the most advanced capabilities. They said, it can detect us and it can turn us, and we can't turn it off. We can't defeat its tamper proofing. And in those cases, they said, okay, we're going to just shut down and do nothing. We'll hope we get on a host that doesn't have this installed on it at the organization. Or in the event that we can't get a foothold anywhere in this organization, we'll just leave it alone because we don't want to get discovered. And so that's really a high level of sophistication in terms of testing these tools. Now, what does it mean for defenders? Well, the most basic thing is in order to detect this kind of activity, you've got to be relying on tools that are going to in some way be unique to your organization, where they're going to be profiling how your organization works and be detecting against that baseline so that there's no way for an adversary to say, oh, we know that company X won't be able to detect us.
Right. And then there's an entire, service marketplace to help, cyber criminals, test their malware and do things like that as well, right?
No, yeah. I mean, if you understand it, I mean, almost any capability you can think of that the security world has on the blue team, right? The adversary has in the web underground, in the dark web. And so, the common example I use is VirusTotal, right? Now owned by Google, right? VirusTotal lets you go and take a file, drop it into VirusTotal, and it'll tell you which engines detect that, right? Which engines say, oh, this is malware and this is not malware. So, early on, the criminal community said, hey, this is great. I'll drop my malware in. Is it detected? No, it's not detected. Great. I'll go use it. Oh, it is detected. Okay. I got to tweak it till it's not detected. Pretty soon, some defenders realized, hey, if we can just get, the file hashes from everything dropped into VirusTotal and block all of those, some of those are going to be legitimate files, but a lot of it's going to be malware. So they started doing that. Well, the offense community, the criminal community figured that out. And so now on the dark web, you've got services just like VirusTotal that they hide from the defensive community. So you can go and test your malware there and know whether or not it's going to be detected by any of these companies.
Amazing. The majority here are saying, they have antivirus firewalls, email spam filters, they're doing employee training policies, but that would be the biggest number here. And then we go to maturity and, they're also doing assessments and testing and scanning and so forth. So I'm not going to ask you this one because I think we talked about it, that, small and mid-sized organizations are definitely relying on traditional cybersecurity protection methods. Quite often, and we've looked under the hood of a lot of small to mid-sized businesses, they've got antivirus firewalls, they've got some, anti-spam protection. That's pretty well the extent of it all. Sometimes it's going into awareness training and so on. My question to you is, if enterprise organizations are putting very, very sophisticated solutions in place and having people and security teams in place. And we know that small and mid-sized organizations are, having very similar types of attacks positioned at them because we're seeing ransomware and breaches and all types of things happening. How can a small and mid-sized organization, deploy, similar protection suites without having all of those people in place? Rob, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple pieces to it. And one is to recognize that it only takes, in my estimation, about 6 months from the most sophisticated new capability getting exposed, the kind of stuff that we saw in SolarWinds, for the top of the criminal world that's just out to make a buck, that's not nation state motivated, to adopt those capabilities. So, there's a window of time to prepare defenses, but it's not very long. It's certainly not as long as most procurement life cycles in most mid-sized organizations for their cybersecurity planning. And so, it really does require some nimbleness in IT planning and in security spending to be able to respond within that window. And then the other thing is it's really just a question of who your partners are. So, the most obvious example that I always give, and I think it's really pertinent right now with the Office Exchange vulnerabilities being used. Here, I think the best advice, a friend of mine tweeted this out. He said, look, if you're not a Fortune 50 company, you have no business running your own Microsoft Exchange server in 2021. Just zero. You just should not be doing it under any circumstances, right? You want to outsource that to Microsoft, or you want to decide to switch over to Google Suites, right? Each of those companies have thousands of people and are spending billions of dollars to protect their cloud infrastructure, their SaaS services, and therefore your accounts from these type of actors. When they find a new vulnerability in their SaaS offerings, they don't need to push it out and hope people patch it. They just do it. You never hear about it. It's just done, right? It doesn't create that window of opportunity that a new patch push creates for defenders to take advantage of it. And so, that's the most basic example of how a small or medium-sized business can take advantage of the scale that's available out there in the market. Now, obviously the other one is your managed service providers and your managed detection and response providers. If you can't build the kind of sophisticated IT capability that you need to modernize your system so they are securable and not insecurable, that's where a managed service provider comes in to help you do that and get you on that modernization pathway. If you're not big enough to field your own 24/7 security operations center to run your detection and response tools and to do threat hunting in your network, there's a lot of partners out there that can do that for you and can do that with you and give you the kind of capability that you really can't build on your own. And last thing I'll say on that is a lot of time that's not even about budget. It's not even about can you get the money and can you get the new seats approved. It's a talent shortage that we have in the industry. You literally probably can't hire all the talent you need. And so there's an economies of scale that we need as a nation, where companies are pooling their resources and working with detection and response vendors, detection and response service providers, so that the best talent can get applied to the hardest problem in the space.
Let's go to a question here. And Rob, I know you only got about another minute and you got to jump off, but I think this is a great question that someone put in here is, how do I convince my leadership team that we need more investment in cybersecurity? Any tips for them on that?
So I think there's two ways to do it. One is just to measure the input. The standard here, I think, is growing. If you look at the guidance coming out of organizations that benchmark, you want to be spending at least 10% of your IT budget on cybersecurity. And so if you're not spending that and you can count those two numbers, that's a good way to just say, here's roughly what we're expected to be spending, and we're not spending that. Now, that's just giving you sort of the raw input to how much you need for your program. The other way I think to do this is to really go through some sort of benchmarking exercise. If you're regulated, that's easy to do, and really document and say, okay, here are the controls that we're expected to have implemented. Here's what we actually have implemented. Here are the tools that we would need to do that. The ugly number that I'll give you, which I think needs to get built out a little bit more, is that a sophisticated organization is spending upwards of $2,000 on cybersecurity per employee per year, right? That's an awful lot of money. If you're not anywhere near that, though, that can be a useful number to push. And I think if you take that and you take on a per seat basis all the controls that you need to implement and the tools that you need to do that, or the third party that can come in and do those for you, I think that's one way to come up with what a reasonable budget would be.
Right. And here at Defendify, we developed an assessment tool that maps against a number of different control frameworks like NIST and Center for Internet Security and so on. And, we developed that because to answer that question of, where do I stand and get a letter grade. But that's a great tool. If you can get an assessment done against specific controls in a specific framework and present that, and say, hey, we scored a D or we scored an F and we need to make improvements. That's a visual representation that can really prove that there needs to be some improvements made. That's great. Okay, we'll go with one more question, and I'm going to pass it off to Karen, who's going to close out with a couple of quick things. What are some ways I can get better security awareness engagement from employees? Any thoughts on that, Rob?
Yeah, posters are great. Videos are great. The most effective thing you can do, and I hate to do this, but I'm going to plug Defendify here. I'm a customer at Defendify for my one-person consulting organization. And the most effective thing you can do is hire somebody to spearfish your employees, to create awareness, to get them. Every month, Defendify sends a spearphishing email to me. And I think probably in the last year, I'm a bona fide cybersecurity expert. They've gotten me twice. I have clicked on spearphishing links that were just so compelling that I just had to instantly click on it because it was, I think one was a vaccine offer, one was about an overdue bill from a company, overdue invoice from a company that my LinkedIn profile said I was affiliated with. And I clicked right on it, right? Now, every time that happens to me, I become much more suspicious of everything else coming into my inbox. There are a lot of other vendors out there who do that work, but that's the most effective way and the most important thing you can get your employees to do when it comes to cybersecurity awareness is to watch their inbox. That is still the number one vector, even for the most advanced threats, to get into your organization.
Yeah, I think a lot of people think phishing simulations is a test, but I really like to call it a training. Ongoing phishing simulations and awareness training. Those are trainings. They're ways to educate your team. And then the last thing I'll share on that thought is, explain why. So, don't just turn these tools on and start sending awareness video. Make sure you're explaining to the end users who are using those devices why you're putting those things in place. There's enough stories and evidence and things that are happening with breaches and so on that you can share why you're putting these in place and why they're important and really build that culture of cybersecurity. Well, Rob, I want to say thanks so much for joining on here with me. I'm going to pass it over to Karen to close things out here for the group. Karen?
Thanks so much. Thanks to both of our speakers for their presentations, but I am afraid we are out of time. And with that said, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today for our special webcast, Removing the Complexity of Sophisticated Cybersecurity to Beat Sophisticated Threats. I am Karen Bannon on behalf of Rob Simopoulos, Rob Knake, Defendify, and everyone at the Spiceworks Ziff Davis family of publications. Thank you for your time and have a great day.